Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. I guess it's one of those I told you so moments. Obviously, this was never gonna work. Obviously, Kamala Harris was never gonna be able to get this thing done. I'm not saying that in the sense that she's not gonna be able to get elected president, because, I mean, you really never know what's gonna happen with these free and fair elections. I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about just the campaigning. You know, Kamala Harris had never actually won a real contested election. She's only ever won in deep blue San Francisco, where she was essentially handed positions of power. Ooh, strong woman of color, you automatically win. You know, those kinds of elections. She never actually had to run on her own skill as a politician. And so it was pretty easy to predict that this was not going to work, especially considering she's going against a guy who campaigns against all odds. You know, people say Trump is incapable, he's dumb, which of course would imply that he's a bad campaigner or wouldn't have the ability to campaign well, but he campaigns despite the entire mainstream media apparatus working diligently against him. And so we were supposed to believe that Kamala Harris was going to be able to compete with this guy on the campaign trail? Give me a frickin' break. The reality is, Kamala Harris sucks at this. She's got -0 charisma, no ability to connect with people authentically, she's a complete fraud, and it continues to backfire in her face. Obviously, we've seen Kamala Harris drop precipitously in the polls, like I keep saying. There's some really bad results starting to come out here. And so the Kamala campaign deployed Kamala Harris to actually do some interviews, of course in an effort to remedy the situation, but just as expected, you know, here's where the I told you so comes in. I think she might have ended her own career. Let's have a conversation about that. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so Kamala Harris has done a bunch of interviews. They're slowly dropping all over the web, one by one, either little previews or the actual thing, and obviously they were hoping for grand results, you know, going viral, the people really loving Kamala Harris, but of course they have one problem, and that problem is Kamala Harris. It's just been so bad. Recently, she showed up on the Call Her Daddy podcast, a podcast that focuses on raunchy sexual conversation. Not exactly sure what the strategy here was, and Democrats are even doubling down with this one after the host of the podcast released a message that she wants Trump to come on her show too. Now I'm just gonna say it as it is. I don't know exactly why Trump would want to show up on a podcast that spends a whole lot of time talking about fellatio, for lack of a better word. But anyways, odd pick aside, they needed this thing to be big, and boy, was it not. Let's just go ahead to the Call Her Daddy YouTube channel, and as you can see, the latest upload is Vice President Kamala Harris, uploaded 20 hours ago, and it's only amassed a measly 200,000 views. That is abysmal. I regularly get better numbers than that, and I'm just a random dude on YouTube who doesn't even show his face. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, who's supposedly the most popular person to ever step foot in politics, I mean, that's what you'd think over the last 2.5 months, well, she doesn't even have the ability to go viral. What a complete disaster, and it gets even worse when you further analyze this thing. Not only were the views bad, but just take a look at the like to dislike ratio. Now that is a big oof from me. 7,300 likes as I'm recording this to 24,000 dislikes. Holy frickin' moly. And if you go in the comments section, I mean, you will not be disappointed. She's just getting dragged. And of course, the copium has already hit. Kamala's wins on Twitter writes, breaking, all the right people are furious about Kamala Harris's successful interviews on 60 Minutes and the Call Her Daddy podcast. Let's go. Really? Because the New York Post seems to have a little bit of a different take. Call Her Daddy fans blast Alex Cooper over Kamala Harris interview, quote, feels like propaganda. Call Her Daddy host Alex Cooper enraged some of her fans over the weekend by dropping a surprise interview with Vice President Kamala Harris on her wildly popular podcast. The podcast Instagram account posted a short teaser video Sunday morning showing Cooper, 30, interviewing the Democratic presidential nominee. However, some Daddy Gang members were not pleased with Harris's appearance on the show and flooded the post's comments to express their frustration and to criticize the show for getting political. One of my favorite podcasts, and now I'll never listen again. Unbelievable. Oh no, why did we have to get this political? Listening to your podcast was a nice escape from everything that we hear about politics daily. Done. This was my favorite podcast. I'm 100% disgusted. I'm so disappointed. This feels like propaganda and trying to make her look Gen Z. What do we call this? I mean, I think there's a technical term. A total frickin' strikeout. Kamala Harris, you're out of here. This was supposed to be her big comeback, a big success, and this is all they've got. Frankly, I'm starting to think we've overestimated her. I mean, it's just so pathetic. Not to mention this big podcast that they released was only 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Although Although apparently the original one was over 40 minutes. But I guess it was just such trash content that they edited it down to 8 minutes and only posted that. You know, kind of giving me CNN vibes. When they recorded 40 minutes of content, then only decided to release 18 minutes of their interview with the vice president. Total disaster. And some people might say, well, you know, it's just a little podcast, who cares? She did some other interviews. Yeah, well, I'm sorry to inform you, those other interviews didn't exactly go swimmingly either. Apparently, according to Kamala's wins on Twitter, Kamala Harris did successful interviews on 60 Minutes and Call Her Daddy. Oh, really? You call this a success?
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. And I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about. Their constituents are those firefighters and teachers and nurses.
Total, utter disaster. Again, you know, people are looking for actual answers. People are looking for real policy. Yet all she's doing is this cheap Bernie Sanders impression. The rich are gonna pay for it. He asked you how you're gonna pay for it, doofus. Oh, well, you know, we're just gonna tax the rich. How are you gonna get that done? Are you gonna be able to pass that through Congress? How much money do you expect to collect? Aren't billionaires just gonna start fleeing and setting up operation in foreign countries? Oh, well, I guess that's just semantics. All you gotta say is the rich are gonna pay for it, and that should suffice, right? Absolutely freaking not. She is clueless. And that right there is the nicest thing that I could have said. And already the Trump campaign is taking advantage. They're already cooking up ads all over social media. The latest one, literally just taking clips of Kamala Harris doing the Call Her Daddy podcast. I don't want to actually play the ad because you never know, if I play some of their content, they could get a little bit excited with the copyright system on YouTube. But essentially, Trump's playing an ad of Kamala Harris on the Call Her Daddy podcast, once again talking about abortion and other things, and then cutting to clips of the disaster happening with Hurricane Helene. And just think about it, it's genius. There's a natural disaster, and Kamala Harris is having a sassy conversation on a lewd podcast. You know, personally, I think that's campaign-ending stuff right there. And yet again, it builds on this narrative that I've been talking about forever. This total disconnect from regular people. Frankly, this constant insult to our intelligence, and really an insult, I think, to the intelligence of most young women. I mean, what do you think the topic of conversation was during that podcast appearance? Abortion, 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 abortion this, abortion that. It's so incredibly stupid. The Democrat play here, the calculation is that women are single issue voters. They only care about one thing, and that's the right to get bailed out of making bad decisions. It's just so unbelievable. It's frankly just stupid. And I really think this might be the end of Kamala. She just doesn't have the ability to motivate people, to inspire people. She's unlikable. Her mannerisms, her way of speaking, the general fakeness, she just doesn't have that factor, and she's going against the guy who has the it factor. I mean, it's not like we don't have direct comparables. Look at Trump's numbers when he shows up on stream, or when he does a podcast. Trump shows up, and we're talking tens of millions of hits across social media platforms overnight, and hugely positive like to dislike ratios. Every time Trump shows up, he gains more voters. Every time Kamala Harris shows up, she loses voters. And now their desperate last-ditch strategy here is for Kamala Harris to show up, I guess, to lose more voters. And that seems to be exactly what's happening. This little flurry of interviews has been an unmitigated disaster for the Kamala campaign, and everybody can freaking see it. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.